Spectrum News 1 presents LA Times The Envelope Roundtables. Brought to you by the Amazon original movie, The Report, for awards consideration.
I'm Mark Olson.
I'm Amy Kaufman.
And welcome to The Envelope.
I thought we should talk.
Okay.
People think you're weird.
It just happens to a person.
Not really.
You can't say anything.
Okay. Ask for help.
I have.
There's nothing to be ashamed of.
I like you.
That's not true.
One small thing. Could you be
Crazy.
And that's okay.
Is he okay? Yes.
Who do I talk to?
I don't know how to start.
안녕하세요. That was wonderful.
Todd, I'm going to start with a question for you. Many people see these as very dark times. You've responded with a very dark and unnerving movie in The Joker. It's now the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time. What do you think audiences are responding to in the movie?
I think it's exactly that. I mean, I think oftentimes movies can be a mirror for what's going on in the world, and I think a lot of people are connecting to Joker for different reasons. Some are connecting to sort of the loneliness that is conveyed from Joaquin's character. Some are connecting to the themes of income inequality. And, you know, oftentimes I think when you hold a mirror up, it's not always pretty what you see.
They've cut our funding. We're closing down our offices next week. The city has cut funding across the board. Social services is part of that.
How am I supposed to get my medication now? Who do I talk to?
Marielle, your movie has a completely different tone. It's sort of a bit more hopeful and optimistic and is really about Mr. Rogers' philosophy. Can you talk about what his beliefs and philosophy were and why you think they're important in 2019?
Yeah, I think some of us who grew up with Mr. Rogers, it's easy to sort of dismiss him as a little bit hokey or like he was sort of sappy, but the truth of the matter was he wasn't shying away from darkness and themes that are intense and what it really means to be human. You know, I'm trying to raise a kid who I hope will be a decent human being, and in this current climate, it feels scary sometimes, like we don't have a lot of role models. So getting to think about Mr. Rogers and the way that he guided kids and helped them deal with the hardest parts of life has been really, it's been really satisfying for me.
Lloyd.
Hold, please.
We can't fire him, can we?
Hello, Lloyd. Oh, it's nice to meet you. What? Are you all right?
Play at the plate.
Oh, mercy, that looks like it hurts.
Let's chat afterwards.
We need to keep
Maybe we could
moving.
have Evan take a look at him.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Sorry, Fred.
Yeah.
Just me too.
All right, all right. Everyone, this is Lloyd Vogel. He is a wonderful writer.
Director Bong, it's rare for an international film like Parasite to do as well as it has all around the world. What do you think it is about the story of the film that's translating to globally?
So I think the story about the rich and poor is something that's applicable to any country around the world. So when you say international, you're basically saying that each country is different, but I think there's no point in really dividing nations because now in this current era, we all live in this one giant nation of capitalism, and I think that's something that Joker is about as well.
Noah, your film, a lot of people view it as initially autobiographical, and yet you've said, you know, it's not. Knowing that that will be people's take on it, maybe at first, did that make you hesitant about like putting it out in the world?
Well, I get some version of that question on most of my movies, so I'm used to it at this point. I often use biographical details or things to kind of spark imagination, and with this movie, you know, I have a personal connection to the material. I mean, my parents divorced when I was a kid, and I've been through a divorce. But I did all this research. I interviewed people who've gone through divorce, friends of mine. So I think it's, it was a way to kind of tell a more expansive story and bring my personal connection to it, into it, but, create something that was, I think, beyond me.
But the title is marriage story, not.
Yeah, well, because I actually, I set out in a way to tell a love story, and I wanted to find a new way to tell a love story, and I found it in divorce.
Charlie and I are getting a divorce, Mom. You can't be friends with him anymore. Mom! Charlie Bird! Mom! Mom? Mom! What?
Lulu, your story is a personal one as well. It's in The Farewell. It comes from your sort of a story of your family and how they dealt with your grandmother's illness.
She doesn't have a lot of time left. She should know, right?
There's nothing they can do. So everyone decided it's better not to tell her.
Why is that better?
Chinese people have saying, when people get cancer, they die.
But now when you were making the movie, you would sort of hear opposite responses. Some people felt the story was too Chinese. Some people felt that it was too American. How did you reconcile that for yourself?
You're used to compromising. So when someone said, oh, it's too Chinese, go find a Chinese investor, that's the first thing, go, okay, well, maybe that's the person to go to greenlight the film, whatever it takes, right? But the Chinese investor would say, this is way too American for a Chinese audience. Your main character is American. And so in the process of making the film and in talking about it, I've come to realize that the story wouldn't exist if it wasn't an American story, if the main character wasn't American. And I've spent most of my life trying to fit in and trying to figure out, which, am I more Chinese, am I more American? I realized that I don't need to fit into one because I fit in nowhere in a way, maybe I fit in everywhere.
I mean, in the sort of the biographical or autobiographical question, don't you find that like once you're on set, it doesn't matter at all? You're making a movie, so it has to work as a movie, so any spark of whatever it was, it doesn't matter. I don't know if you found that, but it becomes its own creature.
Absolutely, you have to separate, right? Like you both have to see yourself in your characters if they're fiction, but you also have to separate yourself from the characters and from the story because, and I get this question a lot because I'm casting a version of myself, or people say, but when I look at Billy, when I look at Awkwafina, I don't see me, and I can't because then she's doing an imitation of me, which is weird.
Question, do you know about my grandma's condition?
你们说的啥呀？
奶奶她在英国学习，所以她会说英文。
是吗？
是的。
宋大夫，我想问你，结婚了吗？
哦，我还没有。
Sometimes your family was on set watching the shooting?
Yes. Well, some, not my parents. I forbade them from being on set, but yeah, some of my grandmothers.
But your grandmother's still alive.
Oh gosh.
And she hasn't seen this yet, or is she reading?
Yeah, my grandmother still does not know that she's sick, nor does she know. I mean, she knows she's 86. She goes to the hospital. They tell her it's an infection every time, and they don't tell her how serious it is. And she still doesn't know. And she was on set of my movie. Didn't know what the movie was about. I told the whole crew, of course, please don't tell my grandma. And now, of course, like it's coming to China. The whole world kind of knows about it. She doesn't leave the house that much.
Right.
Anyone that's in the close circle knows not to tell her.
Right.
So what are you going to do? What's the plan? She's going to go see the movie or not?
Well, I'm torn. Like part of me, she asks about it sometimes, but the family still doesn't want her to know because she's so stable right now, and so they don't. Sorry, this is turning into like a whole therapy session.
But you said if she does see it, you're kind of what you guys are talking about is what you would tell her, that like some things in movies are fictional and some things are.
Oh, you mean you would try to continue the lie still?
Yeah, well, my great aunt, who is in the movie, she plays herself in the film. She's really been the one responsible for maintaining the lie, and she started it. She was the one who got the news, and she lives with my grandma upstairs. And she said, we're just gonna make sure not to let her see the poster, because in Chinese, the title of the movie is "Don't Tell Her."
Greta, when you first met with Amy Pascal, your producer on Little Women, you said to her that I'm the only person who can do this. What was it that you...
I think I say things like that in meetings where I'm like, well, the worst that could happen is they don't hire me, and they probably won't, so I'll just tell them this. And then people say it back to me, and I'm like, I sound so arrogant, but...
No, but what was it about your sort of vision for the movie in adapting the book that you felt like was really unique and that was yours?
Well, I grew up with Little Women as my favorite book, and the character of Jo March, she was my literary character. I didn't know if I wanted to be like her because she was like me, or the inverse, like I made myself like her. Those books when you're young, they kind of get inside of you, and then they become part of your personal landscape of things that you feel belong to you. And those sisters and their adventures felt like my memories and my personal history. And then when I heard that they were interested in making it, when I reread it, it was so clear. There's money all over the book. It's like the first line of the book is, Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents. It's so dreadful being poor. And this sort of women as authors and making art and money, and this sort of intersection between how much financial freedom do you need to have intellectual freedom is a fascinating question, and something that people have talked about a lot. And I just read this, famous Virginia Woolf, Room of One's Own, which everybody says, quotes, like, to write you need a room of one's own, which sounds so like quaint. But what she actually says is you need a room of one's own and money. Because poetry depends upon intellectual freedom, and intellectual freedom depends upon material things, and women have never had money, so how would they ever make art?
And if I had my own money, which I don't, that money would belong to my husband the moment we got married. And if we had children, they would be his, not mine. They would be his property. So don't sit there and tell me that marriage isn't an economic proposition, because it is.
Let me ask you a question. Why did the CIA torture people, lie about it, and then hide it from history?
They claim they saved lives, but what they really did was make it impossible to prosecute.
I vehemently disagree with the narrative here.
Nobody else is going to tell this story.
I would like us to be more than the country that did the report. I'd like us to be the country that made it public. We will not allow this to be covered up.
The Report, rated R, in theaters now.
The movie that made me want to become a filmmaker is a movie I think was shown around Easter in New York every year, and I would watch it on television, is Errol Flynn and Robin Hood, which I loved it because it was Robin Hood, and it was a lot of the great sword fighting, and Basil Rathbone, who I also liked. He played Sherlock Holmes, but he was the villain in Robin Hood. And I started to make all those connections. I later found out, of course, Michael Curtiz, the great Michael Curtiz, directed it, who also directed Casablanca and many movies. But Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland and Robin Hood is what made me want to make movies.
Todd, the two of you started making movies quite young. Yeah. I mean, how do you look back on your first film now?
I mean, it weirdly, you could go from my very first movie to this movie, and it makes a lot of sense. The first movie I made was a documentary about a punk rock singer, Gigi Allen. And when you were talking about the obstacles, I was thinking, oh yeah, obviously we had financial obstacles. We shot it on film, and the whole thing cost $13,000, and just putting that together when you're 22 is a ton of money. But my biggest obstacle was that he was in jail a lot of the time. And when he got out of jail, he was on parole, and he wasn't allowed to leave Michigan. But I couldn't afford to go to Michigan with a crew to film the movie, so we had to bring him to New York. But he didn't care, and he just said, listen, if you send me a one-way bus ticket, I'll break parole. And he came to New York, and then they just put the band back together and started a tour. But the whole time we were making the movie, he was wanted for, breaking parole in Michigan. They finally caught up with him in Texas, and he got extradited to Michigan and had to do another year while we were editing, which actually worked out perfect because it was
for you.
For me, yeah.
For you.
Yeah.
His choice.
There was a few obstacles there, but mainly it's always, I think, financial with everybody in different ways, because no one's going to believe in you to direct, a movie, and you just have to kind of do it.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah. Well, my cast wasn't in jail, so, so whatever I say is not going to sound like an obstacle.
Yeah,
Kicking and Screaming, though, was my first movie. I was 24. Criterion did a DVD of it a few years ago, so I did watch it to look at it, and it was a really like split feeling of like both horror and just so many things that I would have, that I would do differently now. But there was all this stuff that I could only do then that I was glad was recorded in a way, even though I, felt very critical of it in a lot of ways. But I also felt kind of like, well, that guy could do stuff I can't do.
And Greta, you were probably thinking of a whole different calculus because you're coming from acting. So you're like leaving one world behind to do Lady Bird, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess it never felt quite like, I've never seen everything as kind of so separate in terms of, for me, like acting, writing, directing, producing, costuming, lighting, sound, because of how I started in the kinds of movies I started in that were made for nothing, for so little. Everybody did everything all the time. And also I came from I did a lot of theater. I was a stage manager. I also did light and sound. And I sort of felt like I came from a world of all hands on deck all the time. I think for me, the acting was like, well, I'll act because we don't have to pay me, and I can just show up, and I sort of know how I want it done, and we'll write it because someone has to write this. And then it was kind of building everything yourself, and then obviously I wrote with Noah. I mean, this is the moment where I acknowledge that we know each other. We live together. Hello.
I'm over here.
We're separated by
I can hear everything you're saying.
Team Noah. Yeah, we're separated by a succulent.
Yeah.
But because we wrote together. I mean, I acted for him in Greenberg, but then we wrote together. We wrote Frances Ha and we wrote Mistress America, and they were done so small, totally different style of filmmaking, but it was all hands on deck. And then all I see is the difficulty of getting things made. and I think for so much of it was, Noah has this relentless work ethic, but also I would watch things fall apart. And, I've been there when I've seen movies fall apart. And he's like, and I've watched him just like put on his on to the next thing. Like I watched him take the hit, but then be like, we'll figure out another way. And I think that kind of like, more than anything, that like relentlessness is what gets the job done. And I think that, so that when I was going into making Lady Bird.
But I do die inside a little.
Yeah,
we all do.
He dies inside, and then he keeps going. But then when I went to go make Lady Bird, I had no sense that I just knew it was going to be, you just collect your nose, and then
no apostrophe S.
Yes, nose. Collect your nose.
I thought you were saying an expression that I hadn't heard before.
Noses?
Interesting.
Collect your nose.
But then what was the moment, having seen that, right? Like all your career of like how hard it is, and seeing that Noah dies a little every time, you're like, I think I want to try that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was slow. It was slow. I mean, the first time he asked me about writing, I burst into tears and said it's all I've ever wanted to do. And he was like, I think you should then go do it. And then I think I had when I finally wrote Lady Bird and I showed it, because he's my first reader, I showed it to him. It was just, it was like all of a sudden I was like, I think I need to do this. It was like I kept making a bet with myself about it somehow, but it's like if I had said I'm going to write and direct a movie, I think that would have been too scary. I was like, well, I'll just write this. I did the Well, same. I'll just take the meeting. Well, I'll just, and then I just kept walking it out, and because it was too much to say all at once what I wanted.
I mean, my first movie, I felt similar, and it took me 8 years of developing it before I made it into a movie, and it was something that along the way I was told constantly that nobody would want to have a movie about a 15-year-old girl losing her virginity, and that people weren't interested in that. The entire thing was an obstacle. The whole making of the movie was one giant obstacle that taught me how to make movies through it being just banging my head against a wall for 8 years.
Recently, there was a study by USC that said as many as 14 films this year in the top 100 grossing films will be directed by women, which sounds small, but is actually the most ever.
I mean, look at this.
Yeah, right.
Look at right here.
3 of us.
Have you guys seen that change reflected in the conversations you're having in the industry, Greta?
If you're securing independent financing or something like that, there's not like one parent company that's saying, we're going to make 5 films this year, and 3 of them are going to be men and 2 of them are going to be women. You're just in the hustle individually. But I do think that when you're looking at studios and what they're doing and how they're hiring and thinking about hiring, I think that's changing. And I think that they have stopped feeling like it's appropriate for them to only hire men. I think that they've changed their minds.
Or the world has forced them to change their minds.
The world has forced them to change their minds.
I think people there are championing that change.
No,
It's
I
not
think
just
that is
the
totally
world has forced
true.
them. I mean, I've been at Warner's making movies for 15 years, and they have drastically changed, but that came from the top.
Nobody's doing it because they feel real bad that we're leadies. They're doing it because they're good movies and they're excited to see them. And I think that's what's nice about the sort of market showing that there's an audience.
But the truth is, the audience doesn't know whether it's directed by a woman.
They
or
don't
not.
care.
That's not why they're turning.
And they don't
They don't
care.
even know there's a director. They barely know a director.
That's what I
It's
mean.
a job.
Perspective.
Right,
Like, I think people feel that there's a new perspective. And I do think that when they see something through a female perspective, whether or not you know that it's a female director, you feel that, you know.
Directors are my favorite people. Like we are working so. This is not about pitting directors against directors. Like we are all. What we do is so difficult, and it's such a lonely job, and it's so great to get to connect with other directors and get a chance to talk. And like, the directors are not the enemies. Like people who are getting opportunities that maybe we don't get. You still don't begrudge the other artist. This isn't an artist versus artist thing. This is about an industry systemic problem that we need to fix through a major industry. It's not the artist's fault. It's not anybody, you know, it's nobody sitting here who's, I don't know, that's where I always get like, I want to make sure everybody knows we're all in this together and all of us as artists are trying to represent all of our society. There's room for all of us.
Everybody's coming to me. There we go.
The movie that made me want to be a filmmaker is Gimme Shelter, a documentary about the Rolling Stones 1969 tour that the Maisel brothers did with Charlotte Zwirin, I believe. And mainly because, you know, that movie actually caught on film the end of the 60s, kind of amazingly, almost mistakenly. But really the reason why it was is because there's footage that they shot in the movie in the editing room. And that was the first time I was about 12 years old. I think I saw it on VHS at a friend's house. And that was the first time I understood what making a movie is. And so I would say Gimme Shelter. And a fun fact about Gimme Shelter is that one of the camera operators at Altamont was George Lucas, young George Lucas.
Todd, before Joker even came out, there was a lot of controversy and conversation about it. People were afraid that it might even incite violence. The movie has come out safely. How do you feel about the fact that the movie even inspired that kind of conversation before very many people had even seen it?
I mean, we found it offensive because if you see the movie, you realize the movie is actually about the power of kindness. And it bummed us out because we all worked hard on the movie and we knew the movie wasn't about that. We knew the movie didn't endorse that. Obviously, you've seen the movie now and you know. But, you know, so it was frustrating, yeah.
You know, and I'm curious as a director, like, how do you choose what to show and what not to show, both with sex and violence? How do you make that decision? I'm just curious. Like,
I mean, for us, it was the whole movie, not just the violence, but the makeup, the sets, the production design. It was all about running it through as realistic a lens as possible. I don't necessarily think I have to go through things to be able to show them, but I think what affected people most about the violence in the movie is that it felt so real. So it got painted with this kind of brush that it was horrifically violent, when really, if you look at the amount of violence in the movie, it's not much, but I think we're also used to cartoon violence, particularly in that world of filmmaking. To us, it felt showing it as grotesque and horrific is actually a way more responsible approach to violence than the kind of machine gun frenzy, sexy, way that violence can sometimes be portrayed in films.
Yeah.
Director Bong, in Parasite, there is violence in the movie, but there's not a lot of it, but it is extremely shocking when it happens. How do you kind of decide on how to strike that same balance with when to use violence and how to depict it in your storytelling?
뭐 폭력에 접근하는 태도 문제.
So I think it's really all about the attitude and approach towards violence. This is something that I felt watching Joker as well, but you see something horrific and scary happening, but there's a basic underlying sadness that flows throughout the entire film, and I think that's something the audience can really feel. So I think it's that sort of attitude that really matters with violence.
No, I know you and Greta are collaborating on a live-action Barbie movie, which is very cool. I'm excited to see that with Margot Robbie. You two, you alluded to, have written before together. Obviously, this season you have your own films. How do you sort of work that out when you decide when you want to write together or team up?
We're writing Margot Robbie's Barbie picture together because we love Margot. She came to us. She's a really smart producer, really interesting actor, and she was like, approached us, and I'm a fan, and I had some jokes, and then she liked the jokes, and then Noah had some other jokes, and she liked those jokes, and so writing together is just fun. Writing's hard, and to write with another person is just so much better. It's less lonely. It's less lonely.
So both of you actually on the same table, physically?
Greta likes to leave the house to work, and I like to stay in the house.
For everything.
Now we're getting somewhere.
No, but he can work at the dining room table, and I feel like I have
I'm
to
gonna
get.
take a sip of water.
I have to get out of the house. Like I get really restless when I'm in the house, so I have to take my computer and leave, and then I'll come back like a cat that's killed a bird with my pages and bring it back. And but yeah, it's not official how we decide it, but it's really fun.
Yeah.
And speaking of collaborators, Todd, I want to be sure to ask you about working with Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah.
On Joker, you really pursued him for the role.
I did, yeah.
And did he bring a level of intensity to that performance that maybe you weren't even expecting?
Yeah, of course. It's hard to explain to people sort of what an actor does in general, let alone Joaquin in this movie. But the best way I always say is if you took 2 pages of our script and you looked at the scene, you realize how additive an actor can be to a project, and with Joaquin, every day he kind of blew my mind. But it was a pursuit to get him because, initially it feels like a comic book movie. Just the idea of it is something that he certainly wasn't so keen on pursuing. And even when I would explain to him, but it's not that. It just kind of says that, but really we're doing this other thing. There was a little resistance, but the more I got to know him, the more I hung out with him, and we spent a lot of time talking about the script and the movie and what it'll look like and what it'll feel like, and then one day he magically showed up. Because I always say, he never said yes, he just sort of one day showed up to a wardrobe fitting, and I was like, thank you, okay, we can do this. But yeah, it was an incredible partnership.
No, just like the concert whispering, just shut up, dude. I'm trying to find something real. Sorry, it's only such a... It's not a big deal, it's not a big deal. Yeah, it kind of is.
Marielle, for Tom Hanks, America's treasure, obviously. But you have him on set, and then you also have Fred Rogers' estate sort of presiding over the project, right? How did you figure out what was okay with them, or did you have the freedom to do your own thing?
We spent a lot of time in the prep phase of the movie becoming close to the Fred Rogers company and his widow and his family and people who were close with him, and really felt very lucky that we won their trust, that they believed in the movie that we were wanting to make, and that they trusted that we had the right intention, that we were there for the right reasons, and that we cared about Fred and what he stood for, and we were coming at it from the right perspective. So they weren't presiding over us or making they were a total open door gift for us. They were actually there to provide anything we needed to know about Mr. Rogers and about his life, and to kind of give us this context. I mean, his wife Joanne and I have become very close, and I adore her, and she was like, come to his closet. I still have all his clothes. I don't know what to do with them. So every tie that Tom Hanks is wearing in the movie was a real Fred Rogers tie.
So
You know,
cool.
we have like things hanging on the wall that were his real paintings that his sister did for him. What all of that felt like was a responsibility and a privilege. Was we have the trust of these people who care so much and who have worked on this program for 40 years and are still keeping his legacy alive and are still creating programs for kids, and we felt like we just have to do them proud. They opened their stories and their lives, and it never felt like they were watching us in a bad way. It felt like they were there to provide comfort and all of the research we could possibly need.
Talking about like personal perspectives, and what you said made me think of like this debate that's been going on right now with Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola talking about superhero movies not being cinema, you know, like big brands versus a personal viewpoint. Like, Todd, I want your opinions on this, because Joker is a decidedly sort of anti-superhero take on one.
Yeah. I know what he's saying. I know what he means, and I think it goes back to these things that feel like there isn't a singular vision behind it. But I don't think you can dismiss a group of movies in general like that. But I would never doubt him to his face. But he's not here. No, I do know what he's getting at. But
it can feel like it's sort of a corporation is dictating this whole slew.
Yeah. I mean, I understand. I mean, it's hard to talk about in relation to our film was decidedly set up to be an anti-comic book film in a way. So you would think I say, oh yeah, what he said is right, but I don't really feel that way. I know a lot of directors that work really hard on a lot of those movies, and they're movies and they're being shown at the cinema, and tons of people come and experience them. So it's hard to kind of take a side in that, quite honestly.
We'll be right back.
The movie that made me want to become a filmmaker, well, it's actually with two movies, but it was Gene Kelly movies, Singing in the Rain and American in Paris, because they were the first movies that I wanted to live inside in a deep way. Because I loved Gene Kelly, I loved dance, and I loved him, and I loved the way he wore pants.
It was Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. I watched it when I was 7 years old. I was really overwhelmed by the movie, and so scared and so funny and so mysterious, and amazing actors there. Yeah, it was very crucial moment for me.
Director Bong, to continue this conversation about sort of what is cinema, your film Parasite won the Palme d'Or this year at Cannes. You had previously been there with your film Okja, which was then released by Netflix, and now Netflix is very controversial within the context of Cannes and at other film festivals. Do you have strong feelings about the way in which a movie is released or that it reaches an audience? Does that have some bearing on whether you think of it as cinema or not?
시네마를 뭐 어떻게
I don't know how, to define cinema. I'm just someone who works very hard to create them.
저랑 노아랑 둘이
So 2 years ago, Noah and I were the two Netflix directors at Cannes. It was a very lonely journey.
But I'm very jealous because he has exclusive theatrical window for Marriage Story. At that time, I struggled. 그렇게 하고 노력을 했는데 잘 안 됐거든요, 옥자 때는.
So I tried to get a theatrical release for Okja, but it didn't quite work out as well.
넷플릭스가 뭐 아이리시.
So Netflix has been creating amazing films like The Irishman and Marriage Story, and I had a great experience working with them because they gave me full creative control, and now I know they're becoming more flexible with their distribution policy, so I think that's great.
근데 극장에 대한 집착은 아직은.
But I still can't lose my obsession for the movie theater. That's still my best platform because it's the only place where the audience can't press the pause button.
I mean, I've made a lot of movies at a lot of different places. It's my 10th movie, and it's as close to a home or a feeling of a home, of a place, or a feeling of like what I at least fantasize. I mean, I'm jealous of that thing of making a movie at the same studio for all that time. Yeah, it's great. I've always wanted that. I always feel like I'm sort of like, thanks, guy, and then I end up going to the next place over, so. The company that released my first movie was called Trimark, which was called that because it was started by a man named Mark, and also TriStar.
And he thought it sounded official.
That is really funny.
Yeah, so from that point forward, I've sort of always been in these different places, and Netflix is you know, they feel like, you know, a home, or like what I fantasize, like the studio, being with the studio, you know, and having a place you could keep returning to would be.
Yeah.
Director Bong, you have a style of filmmaking where you like to really meticulously storyboard what you're working on so that you know what you're doing when you get to set. But where does that leave space for creativity while you're actually shooting or for the actors' performances?
I actually loved the improvisation of actors. I stimulated, I promoted, but actually they said my storyboard is very organized and meticulous. They said, oh, there is no space, we can do something. But
So with the protagonist actor Song Kang-ho, who I've worked with on 4 films until now, no matter how narrow the cracks or narrow the room, he always manages to find inspiration. And all the actors you guys have worked with, I'm sure they're all the same in that sense.
아무리 이렇게 물고기를 꽉 세게 잡아도 파닥파닥거리는 거는 막을 수 없으니까.
So no matter how tightly you grasp a live fish, they'll just continue to flap on.
배우를 물고기에 비유한 거 이거는 취소, 편집해 주세요.
I take back comparing actors to fish.
뭐 워낙 배우들을 사랑하니까.
You know, but I'm a director who loves actors. I feel happiest when I see them perform something that I never even imagined.
You storyboard, Noah?
No, I shot list.
When you write your shot list, what do you keep them on? What's your
Yeah,
type of paper?
exactly,
What
yeah.
type of, like what?
It's all stationary.
How do you organize? I mean, it's
Yeah.
literally like,
No, do
these
you
are
have
the
a
things I
book?
don't.
Yeah,
Is that like digital or are you analog?
After 10 movies, I'm still trying to figure out,
you,
like, how do I
write
want to
notes
hold
for
the
yourself
script,
during
and how
takes,
big
or
do I
you
make
look
it?
at the monitor, or do you sit by the camera, or
Yeah.
do you, like, it's all these like texts.
No,
Where are you
was
on the set?
think, like, yeah, I'm like curious what everyone, like, how they like their sets.
Yeah, I would love. No one else would want to talk about this except for us. But I would love to have a conversation.
Like it quiet? What do you mean?
Yeah,
like
do you play music? Do you like a lot of people? Do you like, you know, are you you know, are you loud, you know, or are you?
Do you like to have an AD
quiet,
who's
or-
a
What's your
yeller?
answer?
Do you like to
I
have a,
keep eating. What's that?
keep what? Eating?
Yeah.
But I find, I mean, to what you're saying, I find creating these rules and boundaries allow for let the actors feel safe in a way. It's actually freeing.
We didn't do storyboards, but my DP Anna and I would do photos, but I would play all of the roles. So she would lock off the iPhone and I would be like the grandpa on the front, I would be the grandma on the back, and then she would just compose all of the things together, and then we would show the actors. But what was difficult with 13 people is trying to, everybody going, but why? Why am I stopping there? And why is it? I'm like, because the camera's locked off. If you keep walking, you're off screen. Just do, you know, and that was a little tricky because my last film wasn't made that way.
And I have this scene in the movie where with Adam and Scarlett's characters kind of, it was 11 pages, but it's like a 10-minute sequence where it turns into a fight of sorts. I've been likening it to even like an action sequence in the way of it was all meticulously blocked out. I mean, with their collaboration, we figured it out together, and it's all tightly scripted. The overlaps are all scripted. When we're going into close-up, is scripted. When in the middle of what line I knew where I was going to cut. It's like it gives then room, I think, to feel safe and to let go.
So there was only one camera on set.
Only one camera, yeah.
Amazing.
Oh, wow.
That's really
I
amazing.
always use one camera. I've tried to use more cameras and I don't like it.
2 cameras just means 2 shots that aren't good.
Right.
I feel like I always start with, I have an exact idea of how I think this could work, and I show it to them and go, but if it doesn't work for you, we'll throw it all out. And you can tell me if you need to do something different, and then you figure out something maybe better, or at some point you always can fall back on what you knew
And you
planned.
create some kind of bogus reason that you think they'll listen.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe you were, you felt like maybe there was something in that other room that you were, and then at some point you end up just saying, please, it just looks better if you go.
Yeah.
That's where the light is.
Yeah.
Greta,
It's for the light.
Little Women, I heard one of your actresses say that it was in the script very specific how the dialogue was supposed to all be
Yeah.
overlapping, who was talking when. Was that something that was difficult to convey, and especially in some of those big group family scenes?
Well, in the script itself, I sort of borrowed something I've seen from playwrights, which is in terms of overlapping dialogue, because I have specific lines, not unlike Noah, where I want people to come in on each other. Is in plays there's the slash of so a line will be in the middle of a line you'll see a slash, which indicates that the next person has started talking.
I have the same thing too, because I think storyboarding is like when you see exactly how the scene needs to play visually, but I often can hear a scene before I can see a scene. I know how it needs to sound rhythmically.
Yeah.
More than I know always. And I think it's coming from theater. And I think back to Shakespeare days, they used to say, we're going to hear a play.
We're going to hear a play.
And so I think about like that for me, that was always how I got into writing and being a writer. I think you hear things certain ways, and like there's a rhythm that you're trying to hit. And that's why I think I will storyboard action sequences if I have to, but I don't love storyboarding at all. But I definitely have like whatever the version
That's
of
most important.
of
always.
hearing it.
I heard Spielberg is never storyboard. Is it true?
I think that's right. I think because my producer Amy Pascal worked with him, and I think that's so deep in him. Maybe he doesn't need to.
For me, storyboarding is my personal problem. So I'm very anxious without that set. So just for 나를 편안하게 해주려고 계속 하는 거야.
It's just to make myself
Do you do it?
comfortable.
You can draw?
Yeah.
You do it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Draw myself. And
That's great.
Did you do it with Joker?
It just depends on the movie. I've done storyboards on some. I don't storyboard the whole movie, but I think on Joker we did 2 scenes, and it was basically at the end like the mob scene and that kind of thing. But yeah.
if you make a monster movie, creature movie,
Yeah.
you need a storyboard.
Of
From the beginning, we have the number of the shot.
Of course, yeah.
Because VFX budget is very limited. So
Right.
Yeah.
I can show my monster 120 times in this movie.
Right.
And then 그 숫자를 다 나눠서 하는 거야. 그 숫자에 맞게.
And so I lot the shots depending on how many monster.
That's the
How many
reality
times
of
can you-
the
yeah.
creature movie.
That's
No.
so interesting.
Yeah.
There are 2 films that made me want to become a filmmaker. The first one is The Piano, and the second one is Secretary. I watched both of those as part of a course called Feminist Film Theory in college, and they're both about female desire, and that's why I wanted to make films.
The movie that made me want to become a filmmaker is Harold and Maude. It was my dad's favorite movie when I was growing up, and I feel like it was the first movie that I watched that truly opened up my eyes to how weird cinema can be. But it made me feel so much and reminded me about what it is to be a human. And I feel like that's what I try to do with all my films more than anything, is connect deeply to what it really means to be a human. And that movie, I can go back and watch that movie over and over again.
Before we go, I just wanted to ask if you guys are fans of each other's movies, because like Lulu, I know you set up a screening of director Bong's movie for Barry Jenkins, so clearly you stan. Yeah.
You hear about that?
I don't know.
Yeah, I was a huge fan. I saw the film in Australia. It was out there before in the US.
In Sydney.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, Melbourne. And so I felt so fortunate that I got to see it before it was officially out, and I loved it so much that I emailed Neon and said, I'm visiting Barry in South Carolina. Can we please set up a private screening? I surprised him. He was very surprised.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I think obviously we're all kind of fans or friends.
Mike Nichols has that thing of like directing for directors is like sex, and that you wonder, does everyone else do it this way?
That is great.
And so there is always this. I'm just always so grateful to find directors and talk about. I mean, you just feel like you just sort of.
It's a really lonely experience because actors get to work with each other all the time. Directors never work with each other. So I have a lot of friends that are directors, and we'll just go have dinner and just talk about it.
Yeah, it's a great thing.
It's such a great thing. I mean,
when you visit someone else's set, you feel like you've never been on a set before.
Yeah.
You're always in the way. You're always tripping over the wires.
But also when you visit someone else's set, don't you feel so relaxed and you're like, ha, none of this is my problem.
Exactly.
None of
That's what
this
you're
is
acting
my
about.
problem. It's such a joy. You watch a problem starting and you're like, I don't have to solve that.
You're chain smoker.
With electrolytes.
Yeah.
Chain
You
smoker.
look
You
like a
chain
chain
smoke,
smoker.
yeah.
He just said he looks like a chain smoker.
No, I used to jewel. I used
means
to.
he looks cool.
I used to
Yeah.
jewel, and I had to stop jeweling before I directed because I knew I wouldn't stop.
Yeah.
And I knew I'd be talking to an actor and jeweling the whole time because
Well, lucky
it's
for me,
so.
Joaquin smokes more than Humphrey
Okay,
Bogart.
okay,
the
so
two
it's
of
great.
us were like,
You could
But even like, I mean, this is probably overly self-conscious and too much information, but like, I try to not eat like garlic and onions when I'm directing a movie because I'm going to be talking to actors in their faces for months, and I don't want to have
that's
bad
so
breath.
sensitive.
That's very sweet.
Yeah.
China, it's weird because they don't even call me by my name. I don't know if it's like that in Korea, but I'm not used to it. When I got to set, I was just referred to as the director.
Right,
Like nobody,
the director.
导演, and I was
Korea,
just like,
they call me Director Bong. Director Bong is quite.
I'd like to
so
go by
formal.
director. However.
Yes, I'm
Kinda
gonna
nice.
go by that from
We're all
now
gonna
on. I
leave.
don't care what country.
I've been talking about how Tom
Yes, I'm
Hanks.
director.
Tom
Yeah.
Hanks really called me boss. Like, and
wow.
as a woman director, I mean,
lovely.
I'm married to a male director. Like, we get called boss less. It's just something that happens. Like, less people go like, "Hey, boss," but like Tom, Matthew, Chris Cooper, like all these old school guys, like. All
Yeah.
called me boss,
Yeah.
and there's something really
Yeah.
respectful and nice about it. Like I loved it, and
It's great.
But I also find, yeah, I mean, I also find, the DP I worked with, Gerwig, because he's French and he's wonderful, and but I actually I found relief in, I know we always talk about all the wonderful things that happen on set, but like, you know, he was it was wonderful collaboration, super respectful, but like there's just one day we got into it, and but it was about something, and it was a translation issue because he's French, and he kept saying, you never listen to me, and I was like, yeah, all I do is listen to you, and then we were talking, and then I finally was like, what do you mean by never? And he was like, from this morning, and I was like, oh no, that's not what never means.
I haven't been listening today.
Yes, I haven't been listening today. I don't know. There was something about that I just.
It's like family.
It's like
you're
a
like,
family.
oh yeah, you're like, that's how my family. That's how I know someone is
Yeah.
family. We can fight and scream, and then the next day
we didn't fight and
We
scream,
didn't
but
fight, we fought with
experienced
someone.
somebody- we experienced a fight together recently.
Right.
In
that's
Korean,
bonding.
In Korean, South Korean industry, we have on-set editor, on-set editing. So it's very common in Korea.
Really?
Even out here,
No.
just next to the
I've
director's
always
monitor, there is
wanted
one
that.
guy is editing at
Really?
the same time.
Yeah, I've always wanted that, and I.
So
That's wild.
So
it's very common in Korea, so, but I love and hate. Sometimes I love it, sometimes I hate it, because we have to keep going on. But crew members and DP sometimes very
didn't get it.
focused on
You
it.
need another
Yeah,
shot.
and that would hurt my brain because I feel like even when I try to watch an assembly of a scene or something when I'm in the middle of shooting, it switches my brain into a different mode that I can't be in when I'm in production. Like I can't be in editor mode when I'm in production. That screws me up.
Sometimes it's distracting, but sometimes it makes me very safe.
Yeah, because you know you have it.
When Chris Evans and John Hurt, Octavia Spencer during Snowpiercer, when they first watched it, wow, it's amazing. It's very strange, but 1 week later they really enjoyed it. 그래서 뭐 가족이나 친구들 오면 계속 보여주고 어제 내가 찍은 씬 볼래? 뭐 이러면서.
So whenever friends or family would visit, they would refer to the on-set cut and be like, that's what we shot yesterday.
That's pretty great.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing.
Well, I'm sorry that we have to break this up. Thank you all for joining us here today. So for the LA Times, I'm Mark Olson.
I'm Amy Kaufman. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Am I looking at the camera? Okay, so the best piece of advice I ever got about directing was
Hire the professional cat.
I'm trying to figure it out on the spot.
prepare for everything and anything,
No, you don't say action. It's you. It's on you.
and then be prepared to throw all that preparation away.
This cat had to run and go under a car and
Make sure to be on time for lunch.
Yeah, thank you.
You've been watching Spectrum News 1 presents LA Times The Envelope Roundtables. Brought to you by the Amazon original movie, The Aeronauts. For awards consideration,